Happy Monday, everyone. This is Martha with Nature Niche, and this week I want to talk to you about another common invasive species, a shrub this time, autumn olive. It's not a true olive, and the scientific name is Elaeagnus umbellata, and it is an invasive species of full sun to part shady sites. It can grow in all sorts of soil conditions from moist to dry, and it can tolerate high salt content and high pH, but all the way down to acidic as well. And it spreads rapidly, and its uncontrolled spread occurs along forest edges, roadsides, in meadows and grasslands. I've even seen it sneaking into little dry hummocks in some of our wetland ecosystems. It unfortunately displaces our native vegetation species. It does this by growing quickly and shading out our herbaceous ground cover plants and our native tree and shrub seedlings. And it also does allelopathy, so it exudes chemicals from its root system that changes soil chemistry in the forest floor. It has nitrogen fixing root nodules which change nutrient availability, and it makes this shrub able to take over even really unfavorable soils and site conditions. And it's a prolific seeder. It can produce over 200,000 seeds per plant per year, so really high reproduction. And the birds readily eat the fruit and spread it, so that doesn't help. This species leaves out really early in the spring, and it keeps its leaves very late into the fall. So as you're driving around right now, looking at your different landscapes, if you see leaves on understory shrubs right now, it is very likely autumn olive or one of the other invasive shrubs like Eurasian honeysuckle or buckthorn. So be on the lookout. Now's a great time to be looking for this species. It also tends to sprout after both the use of prescribed fire or natural wildfires, and it sprouts back faster than the native plants can get reestablished. And with climate change, it's really likely to exacerbate those advantages that autumn olive has. Its fruits are high in carbohydrates, but they're pretty low in fats and proteins. So they provide pretty poor nutritional value and can actually slow migration for our native bird species. They spend the energy eating them, but then don't get all the nutritional benefits, and that leaves them more vulnerable to other risk factors like disease and predation. And then the leaves of autumn olive, I saw a study that in wet depressions, they may actually increase the reproductive success of West Nile virus carrying mosquitoes. So I thought that was a really interesting reminder that we are part of ecosystems. Introducing invasive species has a way of impacting our own health, and the different plant compositions in our ecosystems, and the health of those ecosystems can impact our own health as well. Nature's not out there, we are part of it, and we influence one another. So autumn olive is introduced from East Asia, so like China and Japan. It was introduced in the 1800s. It was widely planted in the 1950s by the Soil Conservation Service for erosion control. It was originally brought over as an ornamental plant that could provide both wildlife habitat and food, serve as a windbreak, and help with beautification along our highways. So, oops, we planted this thing purposefully all over, and now we're having to deal with those negative consequences of this invasive species. As far as identification goes, it is a perennial deciduous shrub that gets 10 to 20 feet tall, and it has either a very short main trunk, often with multiple branches. Older bark is gray and can get furrowed. Younger bark is smoother, and the very young branches can be more of a brown gray in color. And they produce woody thorns. So this is not a fun one to walk through. If you look right here, these woody thorns are very sharp and over an inch long. It can really scratch you. Not fun to have to bushwhack through a bunch of autumn-olive. The twigs are covered in silvery to coppery scales. And this shrub in general, I like to tell people, it has a lot of bling. It has these shiny scales on the twigs. The leaves have silvery shiny scales underneath. The buds are also covered in shiny scales. And the fruit also has silvery scales. So if you remember it as that invasive shrub with a lot of bling, that can help you. The terminal bud, I'm going to walk over here because I think this one has really good crab claw buds. So I think the terminal buds look very much like a lobster or crab claw. So buds are very helpful during fall and winter and early spring identification. So hopefully that helps you recognize their buds. And then the leaves are alternate. So that's an important characteristic. So they come off alternate along the stem. They are elliptic, oblong, green above with a few scattered scales. But when you look underneath, you see very dense silvery scales. The margin is pretty smooth, so no teeth, but very undulating. So the margin goes up and down, very wavy, crinkly looking. The leaves can be 3 inches long by up to 1.25 inches wide. And the flowers form in the leaf axils in small umbels. They are creamy white and trumpet shaped, about 1/2 inch long, with 4 spreading lobes. And it blooms in late spring to early summer and has a really sicky, sweet smell. I think it smells like marshmallows. It does attract different insect pollinators, bees, and butterflies, occasionally hummingbirds. The fruit is an achene enclosed in the pulpy base of the flower, making it look very drupe-like or berry-like. They are red and covered with light silvery scales as well. They're juicy and edible, and sometimes you'll see them made into jams. So similar invasive species to the autumn-olive is Russian olive, Elaeagnus angustifolia. This species has narrower leaves, only has silvery scales, not the coppery ones, and its fruits are yellowish in color. There is a native shrub species you might confuse for autumn olive, and that is Shepherdea canadensis, known as soapberry. That you can find along Michigan's coastlines and throughout the Upper Peninsula. It has tiny flowers that bloom just before the leaves emerge, and it has opposite leaves. So if you can remember that one thing, autumn olive is alternate and the native soapberry is opposite. you'll be able to tell those things apart very readily. This is the native soapberry shrub. You can see that the leaves are opposite in arrangement. I'll be brief about control because I hope to do some future posts on autumn olive management, but you can hand pull or dig up the seedlings or small saplings. It does tend to have a deep taproot, and as it gets bigger, it's hard to do that. And then I think cut stump treatment with a selective dicot specific herbicide, something like triclopyr as the active ingredient. I prefer, like trade name, Garlon 3A because it's approved for use in wetlands. So if you're dealing with autumn olive in wet to dry habitats, that one it's aquatic labeled and you're safe to use it in both locations. And that cutting the stump and treating it with herbicide can happen late May after the leaves are fully flushed out, all through fall and winter to early March. You want to kind of stop when the sap starts flowing upwards because that tends to push the herbicide back out of that cut stump. So there are a couple of months where you don't want to do treatment, but otherwise you are good to go to control this invasive species. Cutting, mowing, any sort of like shredding the plant with large equipment is relatively ineffective, as is using prescribed fire, because with both cases the shrub species likes to sprout back really aggressively and you end up with even more stems than when you started. So those types of management aren't very effective. Goat and sheep browsing is another option, but it has to be pretty intensive browsing over a number of years to control really well established autumn olive. And I'll end by offering up some native shrub species to plant as an alternative to the autumn olive. So as you're removing it, yes, you're removing shrub cover, fruit that the birds might eat, flowers that pollinators might use. So some native plants that help replace those functions and would grow in similar range of site conditions that autumn olive will take include spice bush, elderberry, our native viburnums and dogwoods, wild plum, our native sumacs, American hazelnut, New Jersey tea, blueberries, the things in the genus rubus, so raspberries and blackberries and dewberries, serviceberry, buttonbush, and Michigan holly. So as you're out and about driving around, hopefully enjoying this really nice fall weather we're having, keep your eyes peeled and see if you can find some locations of autumn olive that need your attention. Again, looking for those things this time of year that still have their leaves. But I hope that helps you feel confident in identifying this invasive species and start considering its control and replacement with more beneficial native shrubs. Thanks and have a good week.